We are here today to have a chat with Professor Narayanan, now retired from IIT Madras. He had a very long stint at IIT Madras of 4 decades before, and is still quite active. Past that he was with IIITDM Kanchipuram and as a mentor, and still active, I guess, professionally. So it is my pleasure, Professor Narayanan, to be chatting with you. We are going to go through your various both professional as well as personal experiences through these 4 decades. I'm sure there is a lot to share, and I'm very happy to say that I have been part of his journey here in 2 ways. One, as a student for about a couple of years. I happened to do my MTech project work with him, and of course came back and joined the institute and was his colleague for close to about 2 decades. So in these 4 decades, I have close to about 2 decades of intersection professionally and as well as personally. So let us begin. When did you join this institute? Way back in 1975. So to give a reference, I was about 10 years old at that point of time, still in school, probably 7th or 8th standard. So and of course I joined as a colleague nearly 2 decades later, and was with you till you retired from here. So what brought you to IIT Madras?
Thank you, Mouli. So it's very nice to be taking part in this oral history interview of the Heritage Center. And actually I'm familiar with this interview process because I had also interviewed Professor Rao for this, just like you were on the other side. I was on your side at that time. Yes, I think in January 1975, there was an advertisement for a faculty position in the Applied Mechanics Department, specifically mentioning the area of random vibration in the advertisement itself. And then it was way back in 1973, and then I applied, because even at that time I was fully settled in IIT Kanpur as a research associate, which was almost like a faculty position. I was taking classes there, and the interview took place somewhere in July 1973. I think at that time IIT Madras was going through a transition. Professor A. Ramchandran had left the institute, and Professor Sampath, who was the deputy director, he was acting director at that time. And the interview took place basically in this building, and Professor Sampath was the chairman, and I remember Professor N.V.C. Swami was the head of the department, and I think there was one from ISRO Satellite Center, one Janardhan Reddy was there. Then from IIC Bangalore, one expert had come. I don't remember. He was taking care of the wind tunnels in IIC Aero Department lab and so on. So the interview went on well, and many of my colleagues also in the machine dynamics lab attended that interview. Professor N. Ganeshan, Pattabhiraman, and because Prabhu was at that time in Germany, I think. And so I went back. I never knew that, even though I did reasonably well in the interview, but there was a big silence for a very long time. And then I think there had been some changes in IIT Madras. I think Professor Pandale became the director. So even though they have released the orders for the internal people who had applied, for the external people whom they interviewed, I think they had kept it pending. And one fine afternoon, when I returned from my office, in my door room, there was a registered letter. I mean, in the sense that there was a message saying that there is a registered letter for you, you come and collect it in the post office. Then that was an appointment letter that we had been selected and so on, and that was in 1974. It almost took a year after the interview to get that information that I had been selected in that process and so on. But I was in a dilemma. I had in the midst of completing my PhD, and then I was already somewhat settled in IIT Kanpur, and but still I also was married, I mean, in the sense by that time, and because my wife was in Bombay, I mean, so we have to settle in some place as quickly as possible. And some of my colleagues had also joined, colleagues in the sense that who had done PhD in IIT Kanpur, had joined in the civil engineering department. There is one Dakshinamurthy who joined, and then again one N.R. Krishnaswamy who did PhD with Professor Ananthakrishnan IIT Kanpur. He also joined the civil engineering department. They said that it's a nice place, why don't you come here and so on. So even before finishing my PhD, I came and joined, and it was in January. I asked for some extension about the 6 months, and then I came on 6th January in the morning, and I first met Professor N.V.C. Swamy, who was the head of the department, and then he said, you have to go to the Mission Dynamics lab, and then Professor B.V. Rao was the head of the Mission Dynamics lab. So he was happy to receive me, and then he introduced me to all the other faculty. Professor Prabhu was there, Professor Ganesan, Professor Ramamurthy also was there, and then there was J. Pattabhiraman was there, and then there was one Bapaya. So it was a nice group, and then he introduced me to Professor Ramamurthy in the end. He was in the next room, and I had seen Professor Ramamurthy and Professor Ganeshan even before in IIT Kanpur, because for their PhD work, for some computational work, they used to come to IIT Kanpur, and they were staying in the same hostel where I was staying. So I was not very unfamiliar with this place. And then some of my friends who were students in IIT Kanpur, like Professor Radhakrishna Rao in the electrical engineering department, and Professor C.R. Muthukrishnan, they were also in IIT Kanpur. I knew them, so I didn't find it very difficult to think that it's a new place. And of course, any IIT is good, and Chennai is always a better place than Kanpur in terms of the locality, and my parents were in Pondicherry. So, and this was also basically in an area in which I had specialized, so I thought I would.
Yeah, so so let's come to that. I mean, at the time 70s, when you became part of the Mission Dynamics lab, which was part of Applied Mechanics department. Later, we will come to the history where we moved. How was it in comparison to, let's say the other IITs? Obviously, you were a product of IIT Kanpur. So, in terms of the kind of facilities, experimental, obviously I've heard a lot about many of our faculty those days, my senior colleagues here, who used to go to IIT Kanpur for computational work, so which would probably suggest that IIT Kanpur at that time had superior computational facilities compared to that. But if you look at it from an experimental facility standpoint, would you say that we were on par or better than many of the IITs at that time?
So you know that IITs, almost all the IITs had some collaboration with countries like IIT Madras, had a collaboration with German universities, and IIT Kanpur had an Indo-Kanpur American program. It's called the KIAP, Kanpur Indo-American program, and then it was supported by a consortium of 9 universities consisting of MIT, Caltech, Stanford, and so on. In that sense, I mean, the type of culture that developed in IIT Kanpur was the usual American university culture, because many of the professors had come there, and the bias there was a very strong engineering science bias in the curriculum, and many of the professors from American universities had come, like Holt Ashley from Stanford. He was with the aerospace engineering department, and compared to the experimental facilities and the lab facilities and also the workshop facilities, I think the German had an influence in that. And then IIT Madras grew in terms of various labs like the fluid mechanics lab, the vibrations lab, the thermodynamics lab, and so on. If you just look at that hydraulics lab, every department was strewn around a large number of places where we had separate labs and so on. So I would say that the machine dynamics lab was very fortunate to get some big grant from German universities, and then it's called the RX lab or the vibration lab. It was first called the vibration lab, and we had the state-of-the-art equipment both in the vibration, in terms of strain measurement, in terms of acoustics. I think we had almost all the sound level meters, the piezoelectric accelerometers from Bruyel and Kerr, which was supposed to be the #1 manufacturers of sound and vibration measuring equipment and so on. And there is a very strong experimental culture in the lab which had already been built around, because Professor Wagner, who came from the technical Hochschule of Karlsruhe, had been one of the pioneers of the vibrations lab, and then he laid a lot of importance in practical work and also in terms of solving some industrial problems connected with vibration and noise. So in that sense, there was more of an experimental bias in IIT Madras. But in the initial stages, I was a little hesitant, in the sense that I felt that IIT Kanpur was very free, open atmosphere, and we could really go and meet everybody, talk to the professors and so on. But at that time I was a student, even though I was part of the faculty. But here I was the faculty, and moreover, you didn't get accommodation in the campus right away, so you had to come from outside. So immediately after the classes are over, the institute closed, we had to leave for the house, we had to take the bus and so on. So in that sense, we couldn't spend too much time outside the class hours in the institute, and I felt a little bit of constraint in the beginning. But whenever you go to a new place, it will be a new place for anyone, and then it will get some time before you get adjusted to the surroundings and so on. But all the faculty were very friendly, and I liked the type of industrial consultancy work which had been carried out, especially in the machine dynamics lab, with a lot of interaction with many industries in and around Chennai. And also this consultancy activities had taken us very far from Chennai also in terms of vibration and noise measurement. In that sense, I felt very good, and because I got to teach random vibration from the next semester onwards, and that was sort of a core course for me right from the beginning. So in that sense, I felt at ease. And of course, the first assignment I had, academic assignment, is to teach engineering mechanics for second year. Yes, right. So I joined in January. In February, Professor Swami called me to his office, because I was not allotted any course since the semester had already started. And there was one batch which was being taken by some postdoctoral people. There's one Elangovan and Shahul Hamid, who did their PhDs with Professor Gista, who was at the time with the biomechanics group, and they were taking one batch. They were not real faculty, but they were sort of postdoc and so on. Then he said, I want you to take that batch of engineering mechanics and so on. He said they follow the book by Irving Shames, and then you also have the solution manual for the problems, and I think it is with somebody, you will get it. And so in those days, engineering mechanics was a 2-semester course, and it was a 5-year BTech program. So, and we had 3 hours of lectures and 2 hours of tutorial in engineering mechanics, and it was a very interesting course to teach. And one semester statics and another semester dynamics, and I felt at home in teaching that course, even though it was the first time I was teaching that course. And it was the bread and butter course of applied mechanics department. I mean, even till now, I think it is there, and then there are people who are opting to take that course, and there are people who are trying to escape from that course, and so it's a very basic course, and so that's how my teaching journey started in IIT Madras.
Okay, you brought up 2 or 3 things. I will start with, it's very interesting, and I want everybody to kind of look at. Today it is very fashionable to talk about academic industry interaction. Yes. But I think in that sense, Machine Dynamics Lab has been a, let's say, really a pioneer. When nobody even thought of these things, we were, Machine Dynamics Lab was out there liaising with industry, solving industry relevant problems right from the 70s, 80s. Of course, when I joined, certainly quickly I was inducted into that system, and the amount of industry connections that I have today is thanks to the initiation into these kind of activities that the Machine Dynamics Lab was famous for. So maybe we should mention this, because I don't think at that stage in IIT Madras or even in other IITs there was a lab with that strong a connection to industry. So there really was a Machine Dynamics Lab was really a trailblazer.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, in the sense that it's basically because of 3 people. I mean, 3 faculty. I mean, Professor Wagner, who really was the backbone of trying to bring in industrial problems to solve. Then Professor B.V. Rao, and Professor Ramamurthy, who had also spent a few years in industry.
Correct.
Before joining IIT Madras as a faculty. He was with the KCP Limited, and then he was really a very good stress analyst and so on. And we had a good backup of people in the laboratory. I mean, very good with their hands, and then dealing with instruments like Professor Swarnamani, who was at that time a senior technical assistant staff in the lab. Yes. And I think before, when I joined, only Swarnamani was there. But before that, I hear that there was one Sastri and some other person I don't remember. And there was also another faculty member, C.R. Subramaniam, who is also basically engineering minded, working with hands and so on. So all these things really contributed for the lab to have a strong industry connection and industrial bent of mind. And then some of the problems which had been solved was also given as some case studies in the lectures, especially by Professor Ramamurthy in his classes. And even when we had courses outside the classroom for industries, these could really form as examples and case studies. So in that sense, there was a legacy built up by Professor Wagner, which is continuing even now. And later on, I think Dr. Sujata joined our lab, and she was also very good. She had basically an electrical engineering background.
Yes.
And so combined with her electrical engineering background and dealing with transducers, instruments, and also her knowledge of mechanical engineering, I think helped us to continue this process. And not only Machine Dynamics Lab, even the other sections of Applied Mechanics Department, like the Solid Mechanics Lab, they also had a lot of experimental work. And Fluid Mechanics Lab, we had a low speed closed circuit wind tunnel, which was very huge, and then they had done a lot of experiments on flows of vortices through chimneys and so on. And I think they are also trying to find out the flow dynamics over a ship, and
I've seen pictures of a bus,
yes.
For instance. I think
yes,
they went to our old
because they wanted
PTC,
to reduce the
PTC
drag
in
and
Chennai.
so on. Yes,
You know,
yes.
I've seen old photographs
yes,
when I was a student, where you know they had done these kind of drag studies
and
on.
Not only applied mechanics department, I think every other department
yeah, they
had
were,
this type
but
of.
I think the extent and the kind of connect that machine dynamics had, it took others possibly a few more years to kind of come to that extent, you know, like what machine dynamics had. The second thing was about teaching that you mentioned. Of course, I know that you owned that random vibration course, and in fact, I think. But when I did that as a MTech student, I think Professor Nigam was actually on a sabbatical, and of course you alternated with him whenever he was away. I think you used to give the lectures. For me, I think it was I really enjoyed, because I have a kind of tilt towards mathematically oriented subjects, which is probably why we both are in vibrations to begin with. I have seen many students tell me that our area is a very highly mathematical and difficult area. But anyway, leaving that aside, so I was fortunate to have both of you teach that random vibration course, and of course I did do a master's project that I started with you in random vibration. But unfortunately, you know, there is why is it that, you know, we weren't able to continue that legacy, find more people in this domain, specifically in random vibration. Vibrations, yes, but
yeah. So you mentioned Professor Nigam. I mean,
right.
It just brings me memories. Because Professor Nigam was my guide in IIT Kanpur.
Yes.
So he did his PhD at Caltech, and his guide was Professor George W. Hausner, who is considered to be the father of earthquake engineering and so on. Because he's basically a civil engineer, but he joined the aerospace engineering department at IIT Kanpur, and he gave his first course in IIT Kanpur was this random vibration course. And I think he had taken this course with Professor Kagi, T.K. Kagi in Caltech, and then just then a book had come by Professor Lin, I mean, which was sort of a very structured book on random vibration, even though there were a few books earlier, like Professor Crandall's Marx book on random vibration, and also Robert's book on, Robinson book on random vibration. That was like a story and so on, but with a lot of probability and mathematics. The first book was Professor Lin's book, and so see, there were only very few people working in this area in this country. I mean, at that time, Professor R.N. Iyengar from Institute of Science, who was a civil engineering department, and who was also doing something on modeling of earthquake, random process, non-stationary process, and so on. And because of the space activities at that time, and they had a lot of random vibration problem, but surprisingly, Professor Wagner, who was with our machine dynamics lab, he was the first one to introduce a course in random vibration in machine dynamics lab in IIT Madras.
Okay.
So in that sense, it was interesting. And so the ISRO and the aerospace engineering, they were all facing many problems, like the buffeting and the response to boundary layer pressure fluctuations, and then the jet noise excitations of space structures and so on. So they used to really call Professor Nigam to and give some lectures. And even in the railways, you know, we have this RDSO in Lucknow, and there is an advanced track technology institute in Pune. You know, the type of vibrations of trains moving on rough rails, and so all those things were sort of random vibration problems. And then Nigam used to give some lectures for those organizations, and then sometimes he used to take us also as PhD students and used to give 1 or 2 lectures and so on. So in that sense, there was a strong connection. We were trying to write a book, combined book. Actually, he had written an earlier book on introduction, just published by the MIT Press, and actually the second volume also was supposed to come in the MIT Press, but then because he left IIT Kanpur, he joined the Thapar
yes.
Institute and so on, and he was basically into administration. He didn't find time. Actually, he came to IIT Madras mainly to complete the second volume, and then he taught that course. I think you must feel that you were fortunate that
yes, absolutely. To have such a
Dr.
wonderful
Sujata
teacher.
also,
yeah, she was also part of the
that course
class
so
at that time. Yes, yes.
And I was very happy that when we had that IUTM symposium on nonlinear and stochastic dynamics in IIT Madras, I could invite him, and then he gave the inaugural lecture, address and so on, and he was also tracing the history of random vibration in the country. And regarding this, the liking to mathematics and then use of mathematics in our engineering subjects, I don't know, there are two ways of looking at it, and was really working with basic design and understanding the main principles, but then not going very deep into the theoretical aspects. I mean, that's one way of doing it. There's another way of really applying very rigorous mathematics and then combine both of them. And I think IIT Madras was following the that first path I was saying, that the most of the engineering path, and I can say the other one is the engineering science path.
Yeah, I think possibly people like you, Professor Vendan, if I can recall, I think the IIT Kanpur background brought in a
but
certain.
Then I think now if you look at IIT Madras,
we have transitioned, so that brings
because
the question.
At that time IIT Madras, people had joined immediately to teach the undergraduate courses and so on, and then they were doing their PhD simultaneously, and so in that sense. But in IIT Kanpur, many of the faculty had already done their PhDs, and they are from the American universities. The culture is different in different institutes, and then they grow in different directions. And then I'm happy that IIT Madras is really doing well, and it is ranked consecutively as number one in the rankings, both in terms of engineering as well as in the overall sense and so on. So.
Yeah, and another unique feature about your research, you have transitioned, your PhD started with random vibrations, but I think then you transitioned into acoustics, if I'm not mistaken, then into something where mathematical flair is required, nonlinear dynamics. And I think right before you retired, of course, statistical SEA, statistical energy analysis. And then I think also towards the end into energy harvesting, which is very popular research topic now. How did you transition, from say, okay, I have done enough in random vibrations. I think next 5 years or 10 years, I'm going to look more into nonlinear dynamics, or I will also venture into statistical energy analysis. How did you wind up doing this?
I don't know whether there was any real path, which I chose and so on. See, at that time, the number of PhD students who were joining the institute is very less. In the sense that in every department you may have in a year some 4 or 5 PhD students would be joining, and in applied mechanics we had the 4 sections: fluid mechanics, solid mechanics, biomechanics, which became biomedical engineering, and machine dynamics and so on. And so then there used to be some sort of a competition to have the PhD students, and PhD students would also like to choose a guide and a problem, by which they would be able to finish their PhD within a limited period of time. And because at that time most of the students who were coming to do PhDs were under the QIP scheme. They had limited leave from their colleges of 3 years, and then within that time they had to finish and then go and so on. And some of the senior professors like Professor Alvar, Professor Rao, Professor Ramurthy had established themselves, and so they would naturally like to go and work with them. And then it was difficult for the junior faculty to really launch into research with student help and so on. So it was a little difficult, and moreover there was, I don't know, Professor P.S. Srinivasan, who was one of the earliest faculty to join IIT Madras, I mean almost from the beginning of IIT Madras, who was in the fluid mechanics lab. He used to say that one has to spend 3 years after their PhD to take up a student in PhD. I don't know whether there was a written rule or something like that. And then he used to say like that. Then, as you say, people with background coming from the other engineering colleges and so on. And if you give a problem in random vibration and things like that with lot of probability and stochastics involved, then at the outset I think they will be really taken aback, and then they may not even try to join and so on. So, and Professor Rao was also instrumental in the sense that since we had a lot of noise control problems we were solving and so on, so he took up the acoustics problem. Actually, my first PhD student was a QAP student, R.L. Shanbhai. He came from Goa, and then so I gave him a problem of noise transmission through sandwich structures and so on, which was, of course, there was a little bit of vibration, noise, random vibration, but this is mostly the traditional deterministic type of a problem and so on. But is really, I mean, I feel even now guilty that. So he joined me as a QAP scholar here, and for 1 year he worked with me taking courses and so on. But then I went back to IIT Kanpur after 1 year of his joining, and then I told him, see, you have just taken the courses, you have not started on your research, so you can continue, you can have another guide and so on. But he insisted that he had to work with me and so on. Then he also shifted bag and baggage to IIT Kanpur, and actually he got his PhD from IIT Kanpur. So right, so
yeah. So no, but my coming back to my, there are phases where, for instance, when I was your MTech student, I think you're pretty much or rather when I joined, I think you were very strongly had graduated quite a few students in the domain of nonlinear dynamics. I think so. The key question comes in, when does that, you kind of tell yourself, okay, maybe this is a new area that I should get into.
No,
just as an area, I think all of us do that. I think all of us have gone through that transition.
They are sort of interrelated. I mean, the sense
I
that
came in with nonlinear dynamics,
right.
Background. But then, as you rightly said, students sometimes run away when we tell them, I'm working in nonlinear
dynamics. Actually, I wrote a term paper for my random vibration course in IIT Kanpur. Then I took up nonlinear random vibration, and then basically, I mean, there were some 2 or 3 methods like the equivalent linearization method, the perturbation method, and then the Gaussian closure method, etc. I mean, it's a sort of term paper, so you read up some 5 or 6 basic papers in that area and then try to understand and then put it in their own way and so on. So it's already ingrained in me about that. Then when I went to the library here, I just found the book by Gackenheimer and Holmes. I just borrowed that book from the library and just trying to read, but it was really very difficult to grind through that book and so on.
Yeah, there is a joke, that the Springer yellow books are dreaded. The yellow ones are to be, for engineers, is something that we try to keep away.
And then even though we didn't have PhD students in large numbers, but we had MTech students in very large numbers. And then MTech students also had to do their projects. So in that sense, every year I think I used to get 2 students. I mean, the first student who did MTech with me was one H.S. Rajsekhar. And I gave him the problem of simulation of random process and application to nonlinear random vibration. And then he was able to really do it and then come up with a good thesis. But the only problem is that they just leave, and then we are not able to really continue and then try to get some sort of a publication out of those works and so on. So I found that some of the MTech students, even though they had come from different backgrounds, and then if they are given the input and then the possible guidance, they are able to do difficult problems and so on. And in the late 70s, I mean 80s, in the beginning of the 80s, this nonlinear vibration or nonlinear dynamics was sort of gaining ground, and it is somewhat pervasive, and I think not only in vibrations, but in almost all problems in physics, optics, chemistry, in
Chaos.
yeah, right. So that yeah, right. Yes, I mean the Lorentz started that only to really model the atmospheric turbulence and so on. So it just fascinated me, and then I also heard a lecture. There was one Patrick Curie, who is a Frenchman. I was spending 1 year Humboldt in the Technical University Berlin, the Technical Institute of Acoustics. So he gave a series of lectures in Technical University Berlin. So it's a very general lecture for all the departments of that university, and then I used to attend, and then I was fascinated and was impressed by his lectures, and then nonlinear vibration had been there from the very beginning. I mean, in the sense, very interesting topics and so on. Even the simple pendulum is a nonlinear oscillator and so on. So that's how the foray into nonlinear dynamics started. And I had some PhD students like Dr. Jayaraman and a few others. I mean, Shekhar.
And then Raghotama, I think.
Yeah,
when I joined, Raghotama was probably...
At least out of the 24 students, 1/4 of them would have worked on nonlinear dynamics.
We guided a couple of students also together.
And actually, when you joined for MTech, I also gave you a very difficult problem. And also is a stochastic stability and so on, gyro pendulum and so on, sort of a gyroscopic system.
So let's look at the evolution. How did you see? Okay, we'll start with probably teaching. Since you have taught a lot of courses. How did you see that evolve from the time that you joined in terms of how does the technology, do you feel, has any impact? Of course, the current scenario where we are forced to go online is something probably you have not experienced full time. Although you are attending meetings online now, but I guess teaching on an online platform is something that you may not have done. But if you look at what do you think? What do you think? I mean, IIT has traditionally followed. Of course, now things may change with these things coming in, but IIT traditionally has been kind of face to face, and we will say, what your thoughts? Is that a good way, or do we continue with that? Of course, students, do in our survey, they did indicate that they still want a face to face interaction. What changes did you see, through these 4 decades in terms of the style of teaching? Did I have to, earlier they were more receptive to say possibly more theoretical things. Today I have to include more examples, practical examples. What has been the change, over that 4 decades from?
I think there has been an evolutionary change in the attitude of students themselves. I mean, in the sense that, in those days when we were teaching engineering mechanics,
right.
I used to have students from electrical engineering, computer science, and so on in my batch, and they would be the first set of students who would score SS and so on. I mean, in those days, I mean, they were not really wondering whether this particular course will really help me later on and things like that. So it was learning for learning's sake. So the curriculum has been prescribed, I mean, which has been decided with some thinking and with some minds which has been put together and so on. Of course, it has to change. I mean, nothing can remain very static and so on. And the sort of truncation of the period of education, say from the BTech from 5 years to 4 years, and from the MTech from 2 years to 3 semesters, and so now it has come back and so on. I mean, it puts a lot of constraints on designing the curriculum and what to include and what to exclude, because you cannot teach everything and so on. And there is also a lot of overlap in the curriculum. Some of the things we teach in mechanics would have already been learnt in physics and so on. I mean, there should be some interaction between different departments to really see, I mean, what has to be. You have to take off from a stage. I mean, you should not be teaching the same thing which the students already know and so on. So these were the constraints which people were facing, and the faculty, they also are constrained in the sense that it is very difficult for a faculty to really learn new thing and then start teaching some new courses and things like that. Then some of them will be very reluctant. I mean, you have to put in efforts to start something new, and of course nothing like classroom teaching, going to the class and interacting with the students and so on. But then with the technology which has really improved to a very large extent, I think it is natural that we have to have different modes of interacting with the students and then trying to really impart knowledge, if you say that is the purpose of teaching. And then see, even IIT Madras started nearly 15-20 years back of this technology enhanced learning and so on, and there had been many courses which were really recorded, and then people had their notes in the computer, and also even if you look at the way of presentation of conferences, seminars, it has also evolved. When you in the 70s you will be writing in transparencies, and then you have the actual slides which have been prepared. Then with later on in the late 90s and early 2000, it's all PowerPoint, and it is still improving, and then you can really drag one picture from there, put it here and so on, so you can make the presentation very colorful and meaningful. And so it changes, and this pandemic has really made a difference. I mean, in the sense that it's sort of a compulsory way, not only in higher technical institutions, but even starting from elementary schools, that everybody has to go through this online mode of teaching. It is an advantage and also a disadvantage, in the sense that people are not able to meet. We don't know whether the student is really when we are teaching in person, there are already many students will be off the class, so they will be sort of not giving attention to the class. So here we don't even know whether that person is present. He may simply put that his attendance, and then he may be doing something else, and then you don't know whether he is in class and so on. But I think that will change with this pandemic really subsiding. And now I think with this experience of teachers and students learning in the online mode, it will become some sort of a norm to have a hybrid way of teaching, and something in the classroom and something in the computer.
Good. Now let me switch gears. You have spent 6 years as Dean of Research at IIT Madras, and I think your period was probably a tipping point for IIT Madras. Until then, I think yours and possibly Krishnaiah's term is where IIT Madras research graph kind of started to move upwards. So can you throw some light?
No, everything moved up. So before that, before going to that, I will tell a little bit about the other sections of the applied mechanics department. As I told you, that it's a very strong department, and there were only very few applied mechanics department in the country at that time. I mean, even now I think it's so. So there was in Motilal Nehru Regional Engineering College in Allahabad. So right, yes. So that was one institute which had applied mechanics department, and then IIT Delhi, they had an applied mechanics department, and IIT Madras, they had an applied mechanics department, and so on. So there was a reason, and then the way in which people started the department at that time to really teach the courses in mechanics, and also some of the courses in dynamics and solid mechanics courses, fluid mechanics, etc. So there was a group that was formed, and at that time I think I think Professor Valluri, who later became the NAL director, and Professor D.V. Reddy. I mean, because by the time I joined, he had left and so on, but he had come to IIT Kanpur to attend the Aero Society conference, and I had met them there. So they were very strong teachers and personalities, and we had Professor Swami manning the fluid mechanics lab, Professor Alvar the solid mechanics, and Professor Gista, who started the biomechanics division, later became biomedical because he had to leave for some other reasons and so on. So he was also not there, and so it was a strong group everywhere. In fluid mechanics, as I told you, Professor P.S. Srinivasan, he was one of the earliest faculty members of this institute who joined along with Professor Velusamy. Velusamy was also in the machine dynamics lab in the beginning. So then we had Professor Ramji, Professor Balakrishnan, Gowda, Aswath Narayana, Lakshmi Narasimhan, and so on, fluid mechanics. In solid mechanics, we had Professor Alvar, then Professor Krishna Iyer, then there's Professor Venkatesan, and some people had left. Professor Palnathan, who was with the FRP Research Center, he joined and so on. And then in biomechanics, we had Professor Patil, Professor Megha Singh, Professor T.M. Srinivasan, Professor Radhakrishnan, so on. So later on, other faculty members. So it was a very coherent and nice group, and everyone was very sincere, and really they took their teaching to their heart, and the teaching capabilities were really good and so on. So I really recall all of them, and then I should say that the applied mechanics department is really had a strong foundation with these early faculty members. And about our lab also, I told that we had Professor Rao, Ramamurthy, Professor Prabhu, who has been very meticulous in whatever he did, and Professor Ganesan. I mean, you cannot really compare him to anybody else. I mean, the way the stamina and strength he had to guide so many people. I don't think anybody would have guided as many PhD students.
Given the challenges in those days,
yeah,
I mean, someone who had close to
40, I think he must have guided.
About 40 PhD students
40
and
students.
Close to about 250, 260 papers. Many of them, I think, almost 60-70% of them in JSV.
Yeah,
and
not only that, I mean, he will sort of very sympathetic to students. You know, some people who had not completed their PhD, you know, the other sections like Tyagarajan and Jay Prakash from the machine design lab, etc. He would call them, you know, you please try to complete your PhD and so on. So in the sense that
he was very
very friendly with all the students.
He had students' welfare.
His grades are only S and A. For all this, I'm just joking. But
I know. He used to tell me. I remember in some MTech.
The student didn't do anything, sir.
Yeah.
He'll give 24 or 25.
Yeah, right. So the Professor Ganesh, and then there was one Pattabhiraman, you know, when I joined. So he is an IIT BTech mechanical, and he continued to do his MTech and PhD and so on. He is a very jovial person. You know, we have Professor T.T. Narendran. I mean, he preceded him in the sense of taking a lot of pun out of every word and so on. Actually, he and Professor Radhakrishnan had attended a random vibration course in IIT Kanpur when Professor Lin and Sinachoka had come and given lectures and so on. And then even during those days in IIT Kanpur, he used to, those level crossings, etc., you will say the level crossing has now opened, now the train can go or the vehicles can go and so on. So, of course, he had to leave. He joined the Engineers India Limited, one Bapaya. Then in biomedical, we have Patil, Megha Singh, T.M. Srinivasan, Radhakrishnan. So, it was a very good, coherent group. Then regarding the administration having becoming, I mean, I had the first administrative stint in the gate office.
Correct.
So, otherwise, I mean, the distance from machine dynamics lab to administrative building was quite large for me. I never used to come here often. And then one day, Professor Sujit Singh, he called me over the phone, and then he said, Dr. Swami wants to be the secretary of the gate. I don't know how it happened, but because Professor Prabhu was the chairman, he was the outgoing chairman. So they have to recommend who should be the. It is like a sliding arrangement.
Correct.
The secretary will become the vice chairman. The vice chairman will become
basically a 3-year lock-in period.
3-year lock-in period and so on. So he was leaving, and then he suggested my name, possibly because we used to go as the center representatives, and everything is a very responsible job of taking the question papers, conducting the examination, and those days we used to do because there is a company, and then we used to see some places nearby and so on. But then I said, no, I am not. I'm very new to these types of jobs. I cannot do it. But anyhow, let me ask Professor Prabhu. When I called Prabhu, he said, no, Narayanan, it's a very responsible job. A lot of confidentiality is involved or something. And so I find that you will fit that job, and then you should take it up, he said. So then, since he is my colleague, and he said, then the next day morning I told so that's how my foray into administration, institute administration started. So GATE means it's sort of a 6-institute operation, 5 IITs and IAC Bangalore and so on. So there will be one institute will be the organizing institute. They will take the responsibility of setting the question papers, getting it printed in confidentiality, distributing it, and so on, and conducting the examination in so many centers and things like that. So that was a honing period of doing some administration. Professor B. Ganesan, he was the chairman because he was vice chairman to Prabhu and so on. So I know Professor V. Ganesan because he was my classmate in BE from GCT Coimbatore. Okay. So there was no problem of really doing business with him, and Professor Venkat Rao of Electrical Department was the vice chairman. So it was a good team, and then I slowly was dragged into administration, and then the problem of setting the question paper and then getting it printed is a real job in the sense that there will be examiners coming from other institutes. Actually, Professor T. Sundarajan was at IIT Kanpur at that time. Then he had come to set the question paper, and the question paper will be set in Taramani House. We are talking about quarantine these days. But in those days, there used to be quarantine. Those people will quarantine in Taramani House, not going anywhere, and so. And then they have to write it, and then once they give the final question paper, all the rough sheets where they had worked it out, all those things have to be torn, and then we will set fire to those things in a place and so on. Then it has to be printed in a very secretive place, a secure. I don't know, everybody we know it. So anything which is secret is not a secret. But then we used to then proofreading the question papers and so on. This is a very real tough job. And actually the other IITs, the IIT Delhi, who was the organizing institute next year, so there was one Professor S.N. Gupta. He said, no, we cannot do it in Delhi, this question paper printing and setting and so on, because I don't trust many of the people here. So can you take up the responsibility of printing the question? So we said, okay. So then Professor V.V. Rao and I took up the responsibility. I think for 1 year, even for IIT Delhi, IIT Madras did these jobs and so on. So that is how it started my administrative. And then regarding this other thing, these acoustics you were talking about, Rao really put me into that acoustic stream, and he made me as member of the Acoustical Society of India, and then we were every year there used to be a national symposium on acoustics, and then we used to go and present papers and so on. And he took up the responsibility of conducting it in IIT Madras in 1992, December. But lo and behold, I think he accepted the responsibility. I think he went on sabbatical or some long leave, 6 months, either to Singapore or Germany, I don't know. And he went, and then Professor Swami said, what is this? This is like absentee landlordism, and then he has left everything to you and so on. But then he came back before the, and so those things are also some sort of a organization, dealing with people, trying to get things done with the cooperation of others and so on. And actually that December 1992, we did not have the ICSR building at that time, and it was around that 6th December, that was the day of the Babri Masjid demolition. At that time, that there was a classroom complex which came near the present computer center and so on. It has not been inaugurated and so on. So then we just asked the administration that you can use it. He said it was not air conditioned and the acoustics was not good. For an acoustic conference, those classrooms and the auditorium, but somehow we managed, and the attendance was very poor because of many trains were cancelled and so on. But that's how the administrative work started, and I was in the doctoral committee members of many students of many departments, not only like the allied departments of aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, but name the department. I was in humanities. I was the doctoral committee member of Mohan, who was also a faculty. He was teaching English, so I was in his doctoral committee. Then in computer science department, in electrical engineering department. So in that sense, if people come to know, and possibly then I was also did some small work for IIT, in the sense that see, I was a Humboldt fellow, and then so then the Humboldt Foundation used to conduct some international colloquiums in some select places, and once or twice they conducted in India. They will have two places, one in the north and the other in the south, because those people in the north, those fellows can go to Delhi, and the people in the south from Bangalore, from Trichy, Hyderabad, etc., they can assemble in Chennai. So many people will give some plenary talks, lectures, presentations, etc. The whole Humboldt delegation will land, the president to all the office bearers and so on, and then it was a big organization. Then there was a local Humboldt club. Professor Kuprajulu was the president of that, then Professor Narayanan is the vice president, and they said they made me as the secretary and so on. Then as a secretary you had to do most of the job, as you know that you were the secretary for some of the conferences I organized, and so you had to run around and things like that. At that time Narayan Rao felt that okay, he could trust me, and to then see the employees. Many of the employees had to be promoted and so on, so there was a scheme like the recruitment and career development scheme and so on. So some people after 5 years they have to be promoted, some after 8 years, and again after another 8 years and so on. So it's called a 5-8-8 formula and things like that. So there was a lot of backlog, and then one day Narayan Rao called me and then said, I am going to make you the chairman of that RCDS committee, and then you have to interview, to conduct tests for all these 1,000 employees, and then for their career advancement and promotion. I told him, sir, I am a junior person, and then you are putting me responsible for this big job. Actually, the members were Professor Narayan Rao, who was the Dean Administration, he himself was a member. And then Professor Natarajan, who later became the director, who was the head of the department, he was a member. Professor C.R. Muthukrishnan, who was the from Computer Center, he was also a member. And then Shanmugam, who was the registrar, I mean, who was supposed to be a powerful registrar. He had his independence of mind, and then he can also be really very critical and so on. So to manage such big people by, no, I trust you, and then so it also requires some sort of a sameness, and then you know most of the employees. I don't know many of the employees. I came to know only after that, and took up that job. But after a few months, I think Professor Sami's term was over, and Natarajan became the director. Muthukrishnan became the deputy director, and so on. So we had to change the members, and then somehow we conducted, I think all the departments cooperated, and also the administration, because it involved the administrative staff, the clerical staff, the lab staff, and so on. So that also gave me some sort of administrative experience. And by that time people were knowing me, I think, in the sense that since I was moving with all the other departments and other faculty, and so then I think one day, I think we were, that was the first Veto Mac conference, I think. I think it was held on a Deepavali day, I think. That was right. So then we were attending the inaugural lecture and so on, and somebody came and said that you have a call from IIT Madras, the director wants to talk to you. And then I came down, there was a booth there, and then Professor Natarajan was there and said, Narayanan, you have to become the Dean Research. Many people have, I think there is some sort of a voting system and so on, have said that you have to become and so on. And then, you know, this is a dean's is a big position, you have to keep confidentiality of matters and so on. I said okay, and then immediately after returning I became the dean and so on. That's how I started the deanship. And see, as I told you that when we joined, the number of PhD students we had for every department were not very high, but things were continually improving in terms of even the MHRD and so on. They were giving importance to more of academic research, and then they said we should have more PhD students and things like that. They just increased the numbers. And you can also know that in those days to get funding for a project is really very difficult, and even if we get some funds, it will be peanuts. We will not be able to even buy single equipment, and then the departmental annual budget is also very low, and which has to be shared between so many sections and things like that. But then this is an evolutionary process in the sense that you are moving from the classroom teaching to digital teaching. So in the sense that the number of PhD students also increase. So it is not that me and Krishnaiah were there that but then we made some reforms in the policies and so on, made things a little bit of, see the so the type of, you know, the rules are there and so on, but we don't bend the rules or we don't break the rules, but we interpret the rules properly. I mean, the sense that things become easier and things like that. That is.
I would like to bring the fact that I think in your tenure is when, you know, the we used to hold the scholarships were not released till the meeting was done. I think it was in your tenure that you basically said, look, don't hold the student to ransom, let us release the scholarship. And of course, if there is an adverse report or whatever, action can always be taken, you know, later. So I think this went a long way in making students feel very comfortable, you know, that
this is like, you know, the computer program is user friendly, etc. This is like this sort of a friendly attitude which you take against that, is it? And also the administration also changed in the sense that, you know, the successive directors from Swami to Natarajan to Anant, etc. You know, the strings were made a little loose and so on, so that you could do some sort of a. So, see, you had the administration, people, deputy registrar, etc., to help you, but they will also be very strict. You know, these are the rules you have to follow and so on. But then there is a way of really telling them and not breaking the rules, but at the same time satisfying their concerns and also making things easier, and that's how it became. And this Dean research, it's not only taking care of the academic research and so on, but you were involved in the administration, and so in terms of taking decisions, not only about research, but many other activities of the institute. Every Thursday, we used to have a dean's meeting and then discuss and so on. And we used to freely discuss, and we had a very friendly atmosphere in the Dean's Committee meeting. And we had registrars like Swami Durai, Janakarajan, then Usha Titus. So everybody, I mean, they were sort of a secretary. They will be preparing the minutes for the Dean's meeting, and we were very open and then expressed our views, whatever may be the views and so on. Actually, once Professor Anant, he attended the directors meeting and then came and told what went on in that meeting. Something looked a little fishy for me, the way in which they discussed, and I thought they could have been a little more liberal or something like that. And the group of directors were called gods. So he said it's a GODS because group of directors. Then he said this is how it is. And then I said the gods must be crazy. There was a film. So everyone started laughing and so on. So it was really a lot of humor, and later on T.T. Narendran also joined the demonstration. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yes, so you are right. Yes, right. And then I was involved, you know, in the faculty selection also, because I used to accompany, not only the Dean administration was involved, but I was also involved to come to each department to set the norms, I mean, in the sense that for professors, what should be the minimum guidelines to set the goals and so on. So then sometimes Professor Ananth will be away. I became a senior most dean when Professor Srinivasamurthy joined the department and so on. So then I had to take up the acting directorship position and so on. But Ananth used to give me all freedom and so on. But every afternoon I used to go to his office, but not in his office, but in that conference room, all the files will be there. Anything's easy, I will just say tick and then put the initial. Something difficult, I will say the director to see and so on. And so then he will come back and tell, what is this director to see? You have to see and then do something. So when I had also been chairman of some selection committees for faculty, because once he went for a longer period of time and then he left it to me. He said, I give you complete freedom. You know the procedures and then you can do it and so on. I think some of the people who have been recruited, I think in applied mechanics department, maybe management studies and so on. I think, and also some promotions, they may remember that I was the person who was at that time the chairman of the selection committee. You have to interact with the external experts and so on, and also look at the internal dynamics and so on. Some people would have spent more time in a particular position, and their output may not have been really fast, but still, I mean, they have done something, and then you have to convince. It is sort of and then I know that one of the expert member could not even come to the interview. I mean, he was held up in the airport and things like that. Then we held the interview over phone. He was talking from the airport and so on. So the online things had started even at that time. Not now, etc. Conference mode, but not on the video mode, but on the phone mode, etc. and things like that. And see, I was in charge of the signing of MOUs for collaboration between universities and so on. So at that time, I used to meet many delegations, vice chancellors and so on. Professor Singaperumal, he was professor in charge of that, and later on he became dean administration. He used to help me in trying to really look at the classes of the MOUs and see whether, I mean, it would stand some legal scrutiny and things like that and so on. Then this convocation is a very big thing, every year convocation. Both the academic deans were in charge of that right from the planning, and so the chief guest receiving that. Actually, as Dean Academic Research, it was my duty to really write the chief guest speech, draft this, because there will be they will ask, you please send us a draft of the speech and so on. Professor Murali Manohar Joshi was then MHRD minister. He was the chief guest once, and then from that office about a month or 15 days back, there was a call saying that we have to send him the draft speech. And so I prepared the speech, and Ananth vetted it with a few corrections, and then we sent it. And I was really gratified when Murali Manohar Joshi took most of what I had written and so on. Yeah, I delivered the speech and so on. Then I thought I am also fit to give a convocation address.
Has it happened yet?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. And yeah. Yeah, right. And also, I used to be many, some of the chief guests like Dr. V.S. Ramchandran, then JRD Tata. I was at that time Dean of Research, and they were given the doctors honoris causa and so on. So it is the job of the Dean Academic Research to write the citations for them. So they will give their biodata, but then we have to write it. Then I have to vet it from the director and so on. And so it was a privilege for me to read those citations. Actually, we had some special convocations where we gave doctors honoris causa. There's one Dr. Wolfgang Paul, who was the once president of the Humboldt Foundation. So we had a special convocation in the ICSR building. And then I read this, and also there was one Guru Raj Deshpande, who was the CEO of Sycomore Networks and so on. I think he had donated a lot of, he's an alumnus of IIT Madras and so on, distinguished alumnus. So I wrote the speech write the citation for him, and then These are some of the privileges, and then see, as acting director, I have to attend some meetings on behalf of. So see, the extension of the faculty retirement age from 62 to 65, there was a discussion in one of the Delhi meetings. At that time, Veerappa Moily, he was chairing that meeting. He was not the MHRD minister, but basically and so on. Then all their directors were there, and so we strongly put up the case for that extension and so on. Then see, participated, Professor Anant deputed me to attend some Southeast Asian Vice Chancellors Conference in Bangkok with Professor S.V. Raghavan. I had gone there, and then we could meet, and then because basically the problem is we think that it is a trip and so you can, but most of the they go there for about a day or two, and then just attend the meeting and then come back and so on. And similarly for the conferences also, I somehow had attended many international conferences, but not much time had been there to really go around and so on. Then there was the one Singapore MIT Alliance was there. They wanted IIT people to come and just participate in that. So myself and Professor Santa Kumar had been deputed and so on. Then we have now the Pan IIT Alumni Association. I mean, the seeds were laid somewhere around 2000 or so. There was a meeting in Stamford, Connecticut, at the Mackenzie's office that Professor Rajat Gupta, doctor, who was the IIT Delhi alumnus, he was the CEO of that Mackenzie's at the time. So in his office it was done, and myself and Professor A.R. Balakrishnan, who was the president of the Alumni Association, we attended that meeting. And then, so like that, then I also attended some Deputy Vice Chancellor's meeting of Southwest Universities of England and so on. So in that sense, we also had some sort of a privilege of trying to meet important people and interact with them. And there was a visit of the Nobel laureate Hartmut Michel, chemistry from Germany. And at that time, Anant was not there, so I had to host him and so on. Then there was the president of the Royal Society, who was also the Royal Baron of Oxford, and he was the advisor to the British government. So when they visited, Professor Anant was not there, so I had to play the host, in the sense that the principal host for them. And so such privileges were also there with the association of a dean, and I felt happy, so on. And Professor Dr. Panchalan, Dr. Surya Kumar, and in my office like Balachandar, Lata, and many others. I mean, I can't name each and every one, and also my fellow deans. I have worked with, since you said 6 years, so some deans work only for one term and so on. In that sense, actually when I joined Natarajan's team as a dean, Professor Anant was Dean of Academic Research, Academic Courses. Then G. Subramaniam was G. Subramaniam, Srinivasa Murthy, then B. Viswanathan, and Muthukrishnan was Deputy Director. Muthukrishnan, I know him from IIT Kanpur days because we were in the same hostel and so on. He was doing PhD in the computer science with Professor Raja Raman and so on. So then I have written, I think, see, when I came and joined IIT Madras, there were already many people I know in IIT Madras, I told you already, like Dakshinamurthy. So I was feeling a little homely when I first joined here. So it was a nice experience to be in the administration. I'm happy that I have been helpful, if not as student friendly as Professor Ganeshan is. I have been at least student friendly. And also there are some ticklish situations. There was one person who did not pass in the first comprehensive. Then he went and complained to me saying that it was not done properly and so on. Then the second comprehensive also he failed. So you can have only 2 attempts. But then he had represented to the ministry and so on. Then there had been directives from there, and then I think there was a very long Senate meeting, and somehow I think we made an exception, and then we also gave him one more chance, but that chance also they did not go through, and so like that there are some ticklish situations. And one important thing we did was, see, the setting the rules and regulations of the PhD and MS programs in a proper perspective, and then we coded it properly because there are so many things like regular PhDs, external registration, part-time registration, internal people doing PhD, MS, and so we all wanted to put everything together. And Professor Bhaskar Ramurthy has already joined as Dean at that time, Dean of Planning, and Professor Vendan, they also helped me. So we put them in a proper order, codified them properly, and then actually one long marathon Senate meeting was there to just to discuss all the rules and regulation. I think it nearly went for 5 hours with a break in between and a second dose of tea and coffee and so on. Then I think it was passed, and then we brought out the books. Now I think you have rules, and so I think later on there might have been some updation and things like that and so on.
And now recently we have had a discussion about changing some of the categories.
I was also chairman of the Library Advisory Committee, and then Muthukrishnan made me as chairman Stores and Purchases Committee. Like that there are many, I was a member of the Indus Committee, you know, that Professor Balakrishnan from IISc Bangalore was the chairman. I was MHRD appointed, and so to negotiate for the online subscription of journals with the vendors and so on. So like that there has been many privileges and opportunities to meet very important people and so on. So I would say that it is not all responsibility, it is also some privilege and so on. So like it.
Yeah, anyway, I think we have been chatting, and you and I can go on forever, but possibly as a last thing I will ask, you have worn many hats: teacher, researcher, administrator. Of course, I didn't bring up you have served INAE in various capacities. I think even now, I think yesterday you said you have to sit through online, I think the awards, for student awards.
Innovative student
awards. So you have been, so you have worn many hats right through. And of course, what I would like to also bring about, as I was mentioning, there's a personal part of it. We have been talking purely professional life and your thing at IIT Madras. I know that you are very crazy about cricket. As I was saying, there's incidents where we were at the airport and we had less than 10 minutes to check in, and you saw Rahul Dravid, and then you decided to go say hello to him. I was getting very anxious because the check-in would close in about 5 minutes. So how does that passion go with the rest of the things? Where did you find the time and energy to follow cricket so passionately?
I think the human capability is really huge. I mean, especially you can see it in very young kids and children and so on. They learn very quickly so many arts and things like that. But as you age, then your capabilities become sort of diluted and so on. But I had this interest in cricket right from the age of 8 or something like that. I mean, this is actually 1954 or something like that, not the Indian cricket. I mean, there was the Ashes series between Australia and England, played in Australia, and the Len Hutton's team and so on. So my cousins, I mean, they were all cricket fans and so on. There was one cousin who was an Australian fan, because most of the people will be Australian fans because of Don Bradman. I mean, he was the god of cricket. I mean, the sense that. But then somehow, they used to, it was in a remote village in Tirunelveli district on the banks of Thamaravarni, my sort of native village, and my two cousins were crazy about cricket, especially not about the Indian cricket, about the England-Australia cricket. One is supporter of England, other one is supporter of Australia, and then they will have this radio set with those walls and so on, and then the early morning it will start in Australia. And then there will be a lot of noise and so on. You know, it's a short wave, some 16 meters or 13 meters, and then You have to really tune it properly to get, and then so they will be gluing their ears to that set, and then they will be. Then it's I was not hearing. The next day morning, one of the cousin told me that the previous day, I don't know which match, that there was this Tyson who was a fast bowler of the England team, Frank Tyson. It's called Typhoon Tyson or something like that. It seems the previous day, in the last over or something, he was felled by a fierce bouncer by Lindwall, and then he simply fell to the ground. But then the next day he became all right, and then he routed the Australian team. I think that series was called as the Tyson's Tour. I think England won the Ashes back and so on, and then he told me, then like that the interest started, and then we used to follow. India also became powerful in cricket and so on. Actually, I came and watched the first the test match in 1961, I think, between Australia and India. That was G.S. Ramchand was the captain, and I was in Pondicherry, and my cousin was in Neyveli. So I went to Neyveli, and the night train, we took some Madras pass passenger or something. The train was full of people, In those days it was crazy. It was in the Corporation Stadium, not in the MCC Stadium. Yeah. Actually, he came in the morning. Actually, we stayed. My cousin's friend was staying in this Velukudi Krishnan. His father was Velukudi Vardachira. So in a house he was staying. So we were staying in that house only, in his house. And then we watched a match. Neil Harvey was there in Australia, won the toss, and then I think that Ramakant Desai, I can never forget that Neil Harvey was clean bowl. I mean the stumps cartwheeling and for 11 or something like that. So it just started like that, and then see, once you have interest in something, it just catches on, and so on. I had seen many matches, and I went to Sydney for a conference, movie conference and so on. I took special effort to go and see the cricket ground. Like that, I also went to Kingston, Jamaica, and then I saw that ground like that. Manchester, I saw the Old Trafford ground, because I saw the World Cup matches, one in Oval and another one in Leeds and so on, the 1919 World Cup match and so on. And here we had this Chemplast cricket ground, So I think once, it was 1999 I think. So they had a tournament in Kenya or somewhere. The Indian team had come and practiced here. So since it is within our campus, we had free access and so on. But even then, people used to tell, don't go there and so on. But then we somehow managed to go there. And then I went to the first floor of the pavilion. I mean, the pavilion was opened by Neil Harvey. So then I went there, and then there was a side by there is nets. So Tendulkar was practicing in the nets for nearly half an hour. So I could simply sit there and watch him practicing in the nets. I mean, such type of privilege, I think, is very difficult to get. And somebody used to say, you're all professors and so on, so why do you go after these cricket people? So that is one trade, and this is another business and so on. So each one to their task. But they're all favorites and so on. So he was exercising in the middle of the ground. I think, who was the sports advisor at that time? I don't remember. So he took me there, and then we took a photograph. I mean, there was a big ball in which they will jump and so on. I think I have that photograph, but I couldn't locate it and so on. So I would also used to, talk a little bit about the campus life and so on. So many of them were friends, common friends. Professor Kalyana Krishnan, who was a joint guide for one of the earliest students in machine dynamics, Kamaraj. He also did something on acoustic transmissibility study or response of panels to jet noise and things like that. So since I had just then joined, we could really discuss, and so Kalyana Krishnan became a good friend. And his wife and my wife worked in a school, Montessori school in Abacus, so we became family friends. Then all our machine dynamics lab and plane mechanics friends, we know the families and so on in some get-togethers, and in the sense that Then I came to the campus. There was many neighbors. Professor Raman of the computer science, he was the immediate neighbor. Then Professor Sankaran, Sujata's uncle, he was in the foreman in the thermodynamics lab and so on. Then on Somashekar, then on Venugopal, who was in the physics department. They were all neighbors, and then again I changed houses. In the other house was Madhusudan Rao, then Professor N.R. Krishnasamy, Mahaseshai. They were all in the same building, in the same flat and so on. Then in Third Loop Road, Professor Ramarao was my immediate neighbor. Then opposite to me was Professor Lakshmi Narayana, colleague. Then later on Kalpakam came there, and Professor P.R. Patsardi also came, and this side Professor Srinivasamurthy was there. Then Philip was there, and so this Third Loop Road was considered to be a little bit of the one-up of all the other campuses, called German quarters. Even though there is another German quarters in Lakeview Road, which is a little too big to manage and so on. So we become very friendly relations with so many people, and we had actually the Third Loop Road, they have some sort of a informal club they used to meet and so on. Even now it's continuing. The wives, whenever they come from some other place, they meet and so on. So that is, I changed other flats also. I mean, I occupied 2 directors' flat. Professor Raju became IIT Delhi director, so I went into his mood. Professor Anant became director, so I moved into his flat and so on. Then I didn't become director, but I attended a director's interview for IIT Kharagpur along with Srinivasamurthy, and so the campus life had been very good. I had been the president of the Temple Association, but I should not forget to mention about our morning walking group. I mean, so I think it started with B.V.A. Rao, mostly applied mechanics, Radhakrishnan, myself, Palnathan, Professor S. Srinivasan, then Raman, even Swarnamani used to join sometimes, then he leave in between and so on. Then there is one D.V.S. Murthy who became neighbors of the chemical engine department, Swaminathan of again chemical engine department. Dr. Panchalan is a constant walking member and so on. So we used to walk, sometimes we used to walk outside the campus. So we will walk up to the Marina Beach or go to Marina Beach by car and walk there. And then coming back, we will have breakfast in that Ratna Cave in Triple K or somewhere, this drive-in Woodlands and so on. I think it's more of eating than walking, which used to go. So like that, we had a lot of social interactions within the campus. I know many friends. And then Professor Padmanabhan, K.A. Padmanabhan, was also he's also a good friend, because his wife and my wife studied in Ferguson's College, Pune together and so on. So it was an accidental meeting when I came to admit my daughter here in Vanavani school. Geeta had also come to admit her son in Vanavani school. Then suddenly they met. Then Geeta dane ni Hema dane, they just started talking. So like that it just grew. And then so the deans, so many deans we had very good interactions, nice time, departments. And then I know most of the faculty in all the departments. Then our foray into mechanical engineering, I mean, we will talk a little about and so on. See, we had Professor Prabhu, Ram Murthy, B.V. Rao all retired, and then we had only 5 of us, and then we had 3 M.Tech programs like industrial tribology, maintenance engineering, which were all introduced as the pioneers, machine dynamics for mechanical, and apart from that our bread and butter engineering mechanics was there, and then dynamics of machinery, and it is very difficult to manage with 4 or 5 people and to manage all the courses and so on. And we, since we were sort of aligned more towards mechanical, we thought we would go into mechanical, and then it just became possible. And so since we know most of them even before in terms of various other academic activities, etc., it was nice to be there. And then the separate floor was created for us, but without a proper roof. So this is a false roof, because Devadas Menon said No, no, no.
Vibration has a role in it.
Right.
Not seismically,
Right. Yes, because he said they couldn't find the design drawings and then whether it was seismically,
safe or not.
because now Chennai has come into that number 3, zone 3 and so on. So because of that, we had to have that. But then it's a nice blending, and some of our students joined there, like Seshadri Shekhar, who did his Prabhu, then he joined us and so on. And there are many students, I mean, distinguished students from our lab. I think I have mentioned, including you. Then V. Srinivasan, who was the President Gold Medal winner. He chose to do PhD here with Ram Murthy, then Gautam, BP Gautam, and then Professor Ganesh and so on directly. I mean, they could have gone abroad and so on. So he went to Watson Research Center after his PhD and so on. Gautam is with the Tata Consultancy Services, and then Professor Ram Bhatt, Professor A.M.G. Prasad, P.K. Raju, and then I've listed even Ramesh, who is with K. Ramesh and so on, Applied Mechanics. Jayaraman, my student, he was a registrar of Anna University, Karthik Jayaraman in IISc Bangalore. So like that, it's a very nice setting, good lab, good department, and the larger department is also very good, I think. Mechanical engineering department is considered to be the best among mechanical engineering departments all over the country, even from that time onwards. So in that sense, and I used to be in many faculty selections and so on. Sundararajan, Srinivasamurthy, Shanmugam had joined. I think I had been in the faculty selection of almost all IITs. Everything because of our connection with IIT Madras and because of knowing so many people. And so I was the visitors nominee in IIT Bombay for selection, and also selection of chair professors, Professor H.E.G. Scale and so on. So I was in the committee of the DST project evaluation committee and things like that. And this Uchatkar Avishkar Yojana, the Prime Minister's. Yeah, right. I am in the domain expert committee 3 and so on. I am the Naval Research Board to evaluate projects. I was in the PAC of the DST in mechanical engineering. I was also offered the Vice Chancellor post in VIT, which I did not take up because
namesake.
right. Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. Because he is not a Vice Chancellor, but he is a good. Yeah, right. So Dr. Vishwanathan was really upset with me, the Chancellor and so on. But Professor B.V. Rao was there for her. So he even now scolds me. What is it? You were always hesitant to take up the top position or something like that, he used to say. So like that, it is a very nice journey. It's a long journey of 40 years and in the institute. And I think whatever, if I am known within the institute or outside the institute, it is all because of the institute, IIT Madras, its people, its faculty, its students, its staff, and everybody has contributed. And I am very happy that IIT Madras is standing tall and is the #1 institute and so on, and everybody has contributed. It is very nice to be known that you had been also in IIT Madras once, and also in IIT Kanpur. Right, yes,
We can go on, but
yeah, right, yes, right, yeah. I don't know how.
talk to you, reminisce about this, although I have known you.
Yeah, right.
For now, ever since I think 1980s.
No, we had also gone together to conferences that to your place with Raj Singh organized that Indo-US. So at was then we went to Maryland and Balachandran and Purdue. Yeah, right. So like that we have gone on.
I think that is one of the enjoyable things of being a faculty. I guess.
No. What I'm saying is that together we had also gone and so on. So. Right, and then in IIT Kanpur, that Pravartana or something like that, Professor Malik's retirement and so on, we had gone, we were all invited.
Yeah, those are the kind of gatherings I remember.
So outside, Professor Junjunwala was also my student in IIT Kanpur. One of the
I think you had mentioned.
Yeah, so I just met him once. I went outside to take the bus from to Besant Nagar, because at that time I was not in the campus. Then in the bus stand, Junjunwala was standing there. He had just then joined
IIT Madras.
in 88. So then he said, hello. So I was really surprised that he could remember as a teacher and so on, because it was 8 years since he had left IIT Kanpur and so on. Sir, yes sir, I remember you very well.
No, I don't think, as a teacher that, the students don't forget teachers. So we may forget the students, but I don't think students forget their teachers. Yeah.
Junjunwala. So I also remembered some of his classmates, one Anup Shivakumar and so on, because some 3 or 4 of them in that particular batch, they were doing well in terms of doing the assignments.
Anyway, I think thank you so much, and I think we will close it at that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, the Heritage Center.
Yeah, Heritage Center for
giving
I
this
should also
opportunity
thank for giving me the opportunity to meet
just going down the memory lane,
yes,
and also walking in the campus once again, sitting in ICSR. Okay. So even now I walk every day in the morning in the beach with Professor Anant, who is staying nearby and so on. So